Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today we've got a new model for 2019 from Steel Will. This is the Lanner, and this is the large version of this knife. There is, I think, a 3-inch bladed version. Quick look here on the blade can tell you, one, it's D2 steel, but also it's probably messing this up, but a Tachenko design. Okay, and I will say I do like this design quite a bit. Now, let me give you a little bit of background here. First off, this was sent to me by Steel Will, and I had a pretty cool experience with this because it was sent before I was even really allowed to talk about it, which is not something I've had the benefit of enjoying before. So I have to say that was a pretty cool experience. And so and the other thing that means is I've had quite a bit of time to get familiar with this knife. And so this is going to be a pretty comprehensive review. I've had a lot of time to carry this. I've had a lot of time to cut with it, kind of get familiar with how it feels in hand and how it cuts and how the action develops over time. So I'm in a pretty good spot to share with you a little bit of what I've learned about this knife, and I hope you enjoy that. The other thing I want to say here is you could almost call me a bit of a Steel Will fanboy. I have reviewed quite a number of their knives pretty positively. The Cutjack, the Piercer, the Resident. I still love the Resident. Great gentleman's folder. The Mini Gecko, the Intrigue. All are pretty good knives. Now, I have to say, I was rather excited about this one because there's some changes here that I really appreciate. So one was the size. Most of those knives tend to be a little on the smaller end of the scale, except for the Intrigue, which was sort of a long, slim knife. But I love the fact that they went with G10 here. I love the fact that overall this is a little bit of a beefier feeling knife, and gives you lots of cutting edge, a big blade, and of course a finger choil. Not that, and I mean a few others. The Cutjack, for example, had a finger choil as well. But I really like the changes that they made here. And although it costs a little bit more than some of those others, at least their budget version, I'm pretty happy to see this coming from Steel Will. Okay, so having gotten all that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and give you size and weight here. So this knife overall is going to be 8 5/8 inches. It's not quite, by my measurement, 3 3/4 on the blade. It's just a 16th under at 3 11/16. The blade here, wow. The handle here is 4 15/16, and this weighs in at what I feel like is a pretty comfortable 4.57 ounces, so almost 5.6 ounces. Okay, so pretty nicely done in terms of size, weight, and carry. This carries really, really well. It's not huge in pocket. It's not overly heavy. It's just, pretty standard weight for a folding knife, and you get quite a bit of blade, quite a bit of handle area, and quite a bit of performance for something that's not too difficult to have in your pocket. All right, moving on to the blade over here, we have D2 steel. Now this one has a black wash coating, which some of you may really appreciate on D2 because of the fact that, it's not a stainless steel. That coating can give you a little extra corrosion resistance. But there's also a satin blade available on this, and I'm a sucker for satin blades. This one, beggars can't be choosers, so this was sent to me, so I'm not really going to complain. But there is a satin blade with a black handle and a bright red backspacer that you may like a little bit more. But for our purposes, we've got the coated blade, and it looks fine. And as you can see, I mentioned I've had this knife for a little while, but the coating has held up quite well. So I have to, look, I don't know. Now it's a stonewash coating, so even if there were some nicks and marks and stuff, you'd never know it. But I find, it still basically looks like it looked brand new out of box. So coating has held up pretty well. What about the performance on this blade? Well, I find this to be a pretty nicely balanced blade, okay? It's 137 stock, 20 thousandths behind the edge. It's a nice full flat, nice high flat grind there, which makes it slice pretty well. And, the other thing I have to say I really, really like is this nice sort of swale here that allows a nice spot for my thumb. I really, really appreciate that. So the performance on this blade is quite good. It slices well. It's well balanced so that they've taken some steps like the swedge and like the saber grind to allow this to kind of carry some material out to the tip to make it a little tougher. I really, really like the way they've done the choil here. Not only does it give me good room, but it's also quite comfortable, and not all choils are. So yeah, do I like this blade? Absolutely. I very much do like the way they've done this blade. Would I love it in a different steel? Sure. I mean, but the fact is, for a budget knife, D2 is a fantastic steel, and I don't really have any problems with mine. Although I will say, if you're the kind of person who is really bad about taking care of things, perhaps you would want something stainless. But honestly, guys, I have a bunch of D2 knives. I have a couple even here to share with you in this video. And I basically treat them like my other knives. I put them, you know, on a display rack when I'm not carrying them. I live in a fairly dry climate, and you know, the odd time, yeah, I'll put a little bit of oil on, but I rarely ever have any issues, okay? So I will say, I'm trying to remember what knife it was now, but I did have one D2 blade that rusted on me a little, and I had it in my pocket, ended up getting kind of damp and wet, and then just didn't have time to take the knife out of my pocket and dry it off. So it kind of rode around in dampish, wet pants for a few hours, and it did develop a couple of rust spots. But that's a pretty extreme circumstance. And you know, most days I don't get wet pants, all right? I have better bladder control than that. And so, yeah, D2 is fine, even though it's not a stainless steel. All right, so yeah, good blade. I'm totally happy with the blade here. What about the action? Now, the action is going to be a little bit of a different story. On the front, on you know, initial sort of discussion, it flips reasonably well. You've got a nice flipper tab here. It's of course flipper only, and it's a liner lock. So those are things I think most of us are pretty familiar with. Now this is riding on phosphor bronze washers, and it did take me a little bit of time and energy to get this performing the way that I wanted it to. So initially out of box, it was okay, but it had a bit of side-to-side blade play, which I've now gotten pretty much rid of. I will say this does loosen off a little bit over time. So right now it's nice and solid, but from time to time over the few months that I've had this, it'll, you know, loosen off, and I've got to just readjust that pivot again. I haven't Loctited it. I generally don't do that until after a review, because I'm trying to see, you know, is this a problem? Can I just forget about it and leave it and it'll stay or not? But anyway, this is a knife you may have to touch up that pivot every once in a while, or once you have it dialed into where you want it, then put some Loctite on it. So it did take me some time and energy to get this the way I wanted it. I cleaned this multiple times. I polished the pivots. Eventually, you know, now it's at a point where I really like it, but it did take some time and energy, and I did have to take the knife apart and clean things, and I even polished the phosphor bronze washers before finally it was kind of how I wanted it. Now, thinking of this action, it has an internal stop pin, and a couple people asked about that and how it functions in the G10, but there's actually a metal stop in here, a metal insert, I guess, that protects that. And if you want to see the internals on this knife, go over and watch my how to get better action out of your flipper video. This is one of the examples I use there, and I have this fully taken down so you can see the washers, and you can kind of take a look at all the internals on there. As it stands right now, I do like the action on this knife. Up to this point, this is not a drop shut knife, but you know, being drop shut is not something I necessarily look for in a $50 or $60 folder. I know there are some out there that will, even some on phosphor bronze washers, but I definitely, you know, find the action on this is to be quite good. And on a knife that I think is for, you know, sort of utility and that kind of thing, I like the phosphor bronze washers. I think you can actually see them in there if I can catch the light just right. Let's see here. Yeah, there you go. You can see the washers in there now. Okay, so I definitely like the action on this now, although it did take me a little bit of sort of tender loving care and a little bit of effort to get it functioning the way I wanted. So I will say that if you get this and it's not immediately how you want it, give it some time, give it some care, and you know, most knives that are on washers eventually will work their way into working the way you want them to. I mean, worst case scenario, if it's really bad and you just can't do anything with it, yeah, steel will tends to have pretty good warranty, but I doubt most of them are going to need that. And I've watched a few other reviews, and I don't hear a lot of complaints. Okay, so that's how this knife works in terms of the action. Let's talk a little bit about construction, which I do like. So this is G10 rather than FRN. A number of the budget steel wheels have been in FRN. So I definitely like that. We've got a fairly substantial backspacer here, but it's done in G10 as well, so it doesn't add a lot of weight. And the knife is still nice and open, so you can clean it out pretty easily. I have had this knife taken down a number of times, as I kind of mentioned there. It took me a little bit of effort and little bit of work to get this pivot functioning the way I wanted. So I'm quite familiar with the construction, and it does come apart quite easily. There was a little bit of Loctite in here and on the screws, but it wasn't, you know, a problematic amount. Let's put it that way. The the overall approach here, I definitely like. It's G10 on the one side, and the steel liner is on the lock side. Again, that's an approach, and I've talked about this over and over again. I really like that. G10 is super strong, and it does lighten up the knife quite a bit. So I definitely appreciate that style of construction, and a number of companies are doing that these days, including at least one or two that I've got to show you here for comparison. Now, the big story here is how it feels in hand, and this knife is really, really comfortable. This is one of those knives that come along where you get it in hand, and when you feel this and you get it in your hand, it's a knife that just molds right into your fingers. It is really, really comfortable. Even this nice swale up here on the blade, I guess it's sort of a droppish point blade. I didn't even mention that when I was talking about the blade, but this kind of almost makes it look like a clip point. Anyway, very, very comfortable knife, and in both choked up grip and sort of a normal saber grip, you know, hammer grip, reverse grip. I don't use that often, but this is a very, very comfortable handle, and that's one of the areas I really think this knife shines. If you're someone who does a lot of work with your knife and you need a comfortable handle, if you need a grippy handle, this is really, really a nice option. So that's construction and ergonomics, which are both very, very good. Let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. I've got a couple here that I think are pretty comparable. Here is the Real Steel Control. This is the White Mountain Knives exclusive version. A little heavier. Of course, this is on bearings instead of washers. But, you know, similar price point and similar philosophy, sort of a budget offering that's meant to be pretty heavy duty, definitely a user knife. And I think this guy comes in just a little bit cheaper, but both very good options. Of course, if you're talking about a liner lock, especially in the, you know, $30 to $50 range, you need to bring in the Rat Model 1. Again, another great knife. The Lanner comes in a little bit lighter, and that's because it's only G10 on the one side, and definitely has a little nicer feel in hand. In terms of the ergonomics, I think the Lanner wins. I don't know, in terms of versatility and in terms of, you know, how tough and durable it might be, maybe the Rat gets a little bit of an edge, but I don't think a whole lot. These are pretty comparable knives. And pretty comparable prices. I like the fact that you're getting G10 over, you know, the sort of FRN that the Rat usually uses. This happens to be the carbon fiber one, but generally that's going to be in some kind of FRN. Okay, let's grab a couple of other knives. First off, Para 2. This is, of course, is not a comparable knife in terms of price, but I do think it's kind of a consideration here because of the fact that these are both definitely sort of EDC style of knives. And the other thing, this gives you an idea here. Here's another extremely comfortable knife. Feels fantastic in hand and has done a really good job with the choil. Now you get a little extra cutting edge here. And I think if this was in a higher end steel, these would compare very, very nicely. And Steel Will, if you're watching, I do think, you know, an M390 blade here or something like that where it's a little higher end would be a welcome addition. I guess that kind of thing only normally happens though if a knife really, really sells well. Okay, to my knowledge, there's no plan to put this out in any kind of a higher end or limited type of offering. So yeah, there it is beside a Para 2. Another nearly perfect EDC knife is going to be the Benchmade Freak. Now this happens to be the Super Freak. Again, quite a bit difference in price, but the normal vanilla Benchmade Freak is a great knife that would be about double the price of this guy. But I wanted to kind of bring it in there because it's a knife people are familiar with, and you guys know I really think it's a nearly perfect expression of, you know, a great EDC knife. Finally, let's throw the 8010 in here. And really the only reason I brought this in is because, you know, it's got the finger choil, decent ergonomics, but here is a knife that has taken that extra step. So I definitely think this is designed to be a user. It's designed to be utilitarian and tough, but the blade grind even alone on the 8015, you decide it sort of reminds you of where you can actually go with that. So those are a few different comparisons. Not all of them are direct competitors because they're in a different price point, but they do share, you know, some qualities that I thought were worth making note of. So overall, what do I think of this knife? Listen, guys, overall, I think Steel Will has done a really, really nice job. Now, part of that is maybe my bias speaking, because I do like larger knives. So whenever someone comes out with something a little bigger, I'm always drawn to it. This is bigger, but, you know, it carries every bit as well as, you know, any smaller, more, what would you say? You know, would you notice this in pocket way more than, say, a Cutjack or a Modus or an Intrigue? And I don't think you would. I think this is a great knife in terms of carry, and it gives you that extra utility and extra comfort that comes from a larger knife. So yeah, nice design, reasonable price. I mean, really well, competes well against others in that similar price range. I think this is a real win, and I think Steel Will has really done something good here. And if you're looking to buy one, I don't think you're going to go far off the mark, all right? By the way, I don't think these are available at too many retailers yet, but when they are available at White Mountain Knives, you can go there and use my discount code SHARPSTUFF. Otherwise, the only place I think I found this these days was Knife Center. So if you want one, you'll have to go there. Otherwise, give it a little while, a month or two, and I'm sure these will be widely available. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.